Psychology is the scientific study of mind and behavior. It involves the systematic observation and measurement of human and animal actions, thoughts, and emotions. Psychologists work across diverse settings, including research laboratories, hospitals, schools, and clinical practices. Some focus on generating new knowledge through research, while others apply that knowledge in practical contexts. In all cases, the scientific method provides the foundation for objective inquiry. Everyday reasoning often fails to accurately predict human behavior. A common example is hindsight bias, the tendency to believe past events were predictable after they have occurred, even when they were not. This illustrates the importance of scientific investigation in countering intuitive but misleading explanations. Psychology examines behavior at multiple levels of explanation. Biological perspectives emphasize brain structures, neurotransmitters, and genetics. Psychological perspectives focus on thoughts, emotions, and motivations. Social and cultural perspectives consider the influence of groups, norms, and cultural values. The same behavior can be explained at each of these levels, and comprehensive understanding often requires integrating them. Historically, psychology grew out of philosophy. Early approaches such as structuralism sought to identify the basic components of mental processes, while functionalism emphasized the adaptive purpose of thought and behavior. Behaviorism shifted focus to observable actions, rejecting introspection, and psychodynamic theory explored unconscious motives and conflicts. Contemporary approaches include cognitive psychology, which studies mental processes like memory and problem-solving, evolutionary psychology, which considers how behaviors may be adaptive, and social cultural psychology, which highlights the role of context and culture. Core debates continue to shape the field. The nature versus nurture debate examines the relative influence of biology and environment. Free will versus determinism asks whether human behavior is a matter of choice or governed by external and internal forces. Questions of accuracy versus inaccuracy consider how reliably humans process and interpret information. The conscious versus unconscious processing debate explores the extent to which behavior is driven by awareness. Psychological phenomena are complex and multiply-determined, meaning no single factor fully explains behavior. Research consistently shows that individuals are often unaware of the true causes of their own actions, underscoring the value of systematic scientific study in uncovering the hidden influences that shape behavior. All human behavior, thought, and emotion originate from the coordinated activity of the brain, the nervous system, the muscular system, and the endocrine glands. These biological systems form an integrated network that governs survival, adaptation, and higher cognition. The nervous system consists of two major divisions: the central nervous system, CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, PNS. The CNS is composed of the brain and spinal cord, while the PNS extends outward, connecting the CNS to the rest of the body. Alongside the nervous system is the endocrine system, a communication network made of glands that regulate hormones, chemical messengers that influence growth, metabolism, and behavior. At the foundation of the nervous system are neurons, the specialized cells responsible for transmitting information. A neuron has three key parts. The soma, or cell body, contains the nucleus and the metabolic machinery of the cell. Branch-like extensions called dendrites receive incoming signals from other neurons and relay them toward the soma. From the soma extends the axon, a long fiber that carries electrical signals away from the cell body to other neurons, muscles, or glands. Surrounding many axons is the myelin sheath, a fatty coating that insulates the signal and accelerates transmission. Neural communication relies on an electrochemical process. Within the neuron, information is carried as an electrical impulse called the action potential. An action potential is an all-or-nothing event. Once triggered, it always occurs at full strength and travels down the axon without diminishing. At the end of the axon, the electrical signal is converted into a chemical one. Neurons do not physically touch. They are separated by small junctions known as synapses. At these synapses, chemicals called neurotransmitters are released from the terminal buttons of one neuron, travel across the synaptic gap, and bind to receptors on the dendrites of neighboring neurons. More than 100 neurotransmitters have been identified, each with distinct effects on cognition, emotion, and behavior. Drugs and other substances influence behavior by mimicking or blocking the action of neurotransmitters. Substances that mimic are called agonists. Those that block are antagonists. The brain itself is organized in layers, reflecting evolutionary development. The oldest structures, located in the brainstem, regulate fundamental life functions, such as breathing, heartbeat, arousal, and motor reflexes. The brainstem includes the medulla, which controls vital involuntary processes, the pons, which assists in movement and coordination, and the reticular formation, a network that regulates alertness and sleep. Above the brainstem lies the thalamus, which acts as a relay station for sensory input, the cerebellum, which coordinates balance and fine motor control, and the limbic system, a collection of structures central to motivation, emotion, and memory. The limbic system includes the amygdala, essential for processing fear and aggression, the hypothalamus, which maintains homeostasis and regulates hunger, thirst, and sexual behavior, and the hippocampus, which is vital for the consolidation of new memories. Crowning the brain is the cerebral cortex, the most evolutionarily advanced structure. The cortex contains about 20 billion neurons and approximately 300 trillion synaptic connections, supported by billions of glial cells that provide nourishment, insulation, and structural support. The cortex is divided into two hemispheres, each containing 4 lobes separated by deep fissures. The frontal lobe governs higher-order cognition such as planning, reasoning, decision-making, and memory. The parietal lobe processes somatosensory information, including touch and spatial orientation. The occipital lobe specializes in visual processing, while the temporal lobe is responsible for hearing and language comprehension. Within these lobes lie specialized regions, such as the motor cortex, which directs voluntary movement, the somatosensory cortex, which maps sensory input from the body, the visual cortex, the auditory cortex, and association areas that integrate information across multiple domains. The brain is not static. It demonstrates neuroplasticity, the capacity to reorganize and form new neural pathways, particularly in response to learning and experience. It can also generate new neurons through neurogenesis, a process most prominent in the hippocampus. Scientific study of the brain has advanced through methods ranging from post-mortem dissection and lesion analysis to modern neuroimaging techniques. Electroencephalography, EEG, records electrical activity across the scalp. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, measures changes in blood flow associated with neural activity. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, uses magnetic fields to temporarily disrupt or stimulate neural regions, providing causal evidence of brain function. The nervous system also includes distinct types of neurons with specialized roles. Sensory or afferent, neurons carry incoming information from receptors in the body to the central nervous system. Motor or efferent, neurons transmit signals from the CNS to muscles and glands, directing action. Interneurons, which make up the majority, operate within the CNS and link sensory and motor neurons in complex networks. The peripheral nervous system is further divided into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, ANS. The somatic system controls voluntary movements of skeletal muscles. The autonomic system regulates involuntary functions such as heart rate, digestion, and glandular activity. Within the autonomic system, the sympathetic division prepares the body for action by increasing arousal, accelerating heart rate, and mobilizing energy. The parasympathetic division has the opposite effect, calming the body, conserving energy, and returning it to baseline after stress. The endocrine system works in concert with the nervous system. Key glands include the pituitary gland, often termed the master gland for its regulation of growth and its influence over other glands. The pancreas, which regulates blood sugar. The adrenal glands, which release stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline. And the gonads, which secrete sex hormones. Testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone influence reproductive behavior, development, and psychological differences associated with gender. Sensation and perception are the fundamental processes through which organisms interact with the environment. Sensation refers to the initial detection of energy from the physical world, while perception refers to the brain's interpretation and organization of that sensory input. The two processes operate seamlessly, allowing humans to not only detect the presence of stimuli, but also to perceive changes, relationships, and patterns within them. The field of psychophysics examines the relationship between the physical characteristics of stimuli and the psychological experiences they produce. Two central concepts in psychophysics are the absolute threshold, the minimum intensity at which a stimulus can be detected at least 50% of the time, and the difference threshold, or just noticeable difference, JND, the smallest detectable difference between two stimuli. Weber's law states that the JND is proportional to the magnitude of the original stimulus. The larger the baseline intensity, the greater the difference required for detection. Underlying sensation is the process of transduction, whereby specialized receptor cells convert external forms of energy into electrochemical signals that the nervous system can process. Each sensory system accomplishes this in a different manner, but the principle remains consistent. Energy in the environment is transformed into neural activity for interpretation in the brain. A disproportionately large portion of the cerebral cortex is devoted to vision, reflecting the dominance of sight in human perception. The eye is a specialized sensory organ composed of multiple structures that function together to direct and focus light. The cornea is the transparent outer layer that bends light toward the pupil. The opening in the center of the iris, which regulates light intake. The lens adjusts its curvature to focus images on the retina, a layer of photoreceptor cells at the back of the eye. Two primary receptor cells, rods and cones, transduce light into neural signals. Rods are highly sensitive to low levels of illumination and are crucial for night vision, but do not convey color information. Cones, by contrast, function best in bright light and enable the perception of color and fine detail. These signals travel through the optic nerve to the visual cortex in the occipital lobe. Neural processing in the visual cortex involves feature detector neurons, which respond selectively to specific attributes such as edges, orientation, and movement. The perception of color is explained by two complementary theories. The trichromatic theory, Young-Helmholtz, proposes that color vision results from the activation of three types of cones, each sensitive to short, blue, medium, green, or long, red, wavelengths. The opponent process theory posits that color perception is controlled by opposing neural processes, red versus green, blue versus yellow, and black versus white. Together, these theories explain the full range of color vision phenomena. Depth perception is made possible by binocular cues, such as retinal disparity, and monocular cues, which rely on Gestalt principles like relative size, linear perspective, and interposition. Motion perception involves perceptual phenomena such as the phi phenomenon, the illusion of motion from rapidly alternating images, and the beta effect, the perception of continuous movement from flashing lights. Hearing, or audition, is the detection of sound waves, which are fluctuations in air pressure. Two main properties of sound are critical: amplitude, perceived as loudness, and frequency, perceived as pitch. The ear consists of several structures that direct and transduce sound. The pinna, or outer ear, collects sound waves and channels them to the eardrum, a membrane that vibrates in response. These vibrations are amplified by three tiny bones in the middle ear, the ossicles, malleus, incus, and stapes. Vibrations pass to the oval window, which sets the fluid-filled cochlea in motion. Hair cells within the cochlea transduce the mechanical energy into neural signals that travel to the auditory cortex. Two main theories explain pitch perception. The frequency theory proposes that the frequency of neural firing matches the frequency of the sound wave, accounting for low-pitched sounds. The place theory argues that different frequencies stimulate specific locations along the cochlea's basilar membrane, explaining higher-pitched sounds. Exposure to sounds at 85 decibels or higher can lead to cumulative hearing damage, especially with prolonged exposure, while brief exposure to sounds over 130 decibels can cause immediate harm to auditory structures. Taste, or gustation, detects chemical substances through receptors on the tongue grouped in taste buds. Humans recognize at least 6 distinct taste qualities: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, piquancy, spiciness, and umami, savory, associated with glutamate. These basic tastes contribute to flavor, which is heavily influenced by olfactory input. Smell, or olfaction, relies on approximately 1,000 types of receptor cells located in the nasal cavity, enabling detection of an estimated 10,000 different odors. Unlike other sensory modalities, olfactory information bypasses the thalamus and projects directly to the olfactory bulb and limbic structures, linking smell closely with memory and emotion. The skin contains thousands of receptor cells that respond to 4 fundamental types of stimuli: pressure, warmth, cold, and pain. Of these, pressure has dedicated specialized receptors, while sensations of temperature and pain are conveyed through free nerve endings. Pain perception is complex, involving both sensory pathways and cognitive appraisal, and is influenced by factors such as attention and emotion. The body also possesses internal senses that track movement and balance, Kinesthesia provides information about the position and movement of body parts through receptors in muscles and joints. The vestibular system, located in the inner ear, monitors balance and spatial orientation by detecting changes in head movement and position relative to gravity. Perception extends beyond the raw detection of sensory input. It involves selective attention, the ability to focus on certain stimuli while ignoring others, sensory adaptation, the reduced sensitivity that occurs after constant exposure, and perceptual constancy, the ability to perceive objects as unchanging, despite variations in sensory input, such as differences in lighting, distance, or angle. Interactions among the senses, known as sensory interaction, enhance perception. For example, flavor perception combines taste and smell, while vision can influence auditory experiences, as in the McGurk effect. Although highly effective, perception is not flawless. Expectations, prior knowledge, and emotions can bias sensory interpretation, sometimes producing illusions in which the brain misinterprets sensory input. These errors highlight that perception is not a passive reflection of reality, but an active construction by the brain. Consciousness is defined as the subjective awareness of the self and the environment. It represents the ability to reflect, reason, and monitor ongoing mental and physical processes. Consciousness is functional because it enables logical reasoning, planning of actions, evaluation of outcomes, and the continuous adjustment of behavior in pursuit of goals. Without conscious awareness, goal-directed thought and long-term planning would be impossible. The concept of consciousness has been central to psychology since its inception. Sigmund Freud emphasized the division between the conscious and unconscious mind. He argued that much of human behavior arises from unconscious processes, such as hidden wishes and unresolved conflicts, even when individuals believe they are acting rationally. Modern psychology extends this distinction by differentiating between automatic, unconscious processes, such as habits and reflexes, and controlled, conscious processes that require attention. Similarly, implicit cognition operates outside awareness, shaping preferences and judgments, while explicit cognition involves deliberate thought and conscious memory. Philosophical debates about the nature of consciousness extend further back. René Descartes, a 17th century philosopher, was a prominent advocate of dualism, the idea that the mind is a separate immaterial entity, distinct from the physical body. Dualism argued that thought and consciousness could not be explained in purely physical terms. In contrast, modern psychology is monist in orientation, holding that the mind is not separate but emerges from brain activity. Consciousness, therefore, is understood as a property of neural systems. Behavior is shaped by biological rhythms, which are cyclic patterns of bodily activity. The most prominent is the circadian rhythm, a roughly 24-hour cycle that regulates sleep and wakefulness, body temperature, hormone secretion, and other physiological functions. These rhythms are guided by the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus, which is sensitive to light cues from the environment. Disruptions to circadian rhythms, such as those caused by jet lag or shift work, impair performance, alertness, and health. Sleep research demonstrates that sleep occurs in predictable stages, lasting approximately 90 minutes each. Non-rapid eye movement, non-REM sleep, includes 3 stages. Stage N1 is light, sleep characterized by drifting thoughts and occasional muscle twitches. Stage N2 involves deeper sleep, marked by sleep spindles and K complexes in brain activity. Stage N3 also called slow-wave sleep, shows large, slow delta waves, and is associated with physical restoration. Rapid eye movement, REM sleep, comprising about 25% of sleep, is a paradoxical stage in which brain activity resembles wakefulness, while the body remains largely immobilized. Most dreaming occurs during REM sleep. Sleep has vital restorative and adaptive functions. It consolidates memory, regulates mood, supports immune functioning, and restores energy balance. Chronic sleep deprivation impairs cognition, increases anxiety, weakens immunity, raises risk for obesity and hypertension, and, in extreme cases, can be life-threatening. Several sleep disorders disrupt normal rest. Insomnia involves persistent difficulty falling or staying asleep. Sleep apnea interrupts breathing during sleep, leading to repeated awakenings. Narcolepsy causes sudden, uncontrollable sleep attacks. Sleepwalking occurs in non-REM stages and involves motor activity without conscious awareness. REM sleep behavior disorder allows individuals to act out dreams due to a failure of muscle paralysis during REM sleep. Theories of dreaming attempt to explain the psychological function of dreams. Freud viewed dreams as disguised forms of wish fulfillment, distinguishing between the manifest content, the literal storyline, and the latent content, the hidden symbolic meaning. Cognitive theories emphasize dreams as tools for memory consolidation, problem solving, and emotional regulation. The activation synthesis theory suggests that dreams result from the brain's interpretation of random neural activity, originating in the brainstem, creating narratives to impose meaning on chaotic signals. Consciousness can be modified by psychoactive substances and mental practices. Psychoactive drugs alter perception, mood, and cognition. They vary in their mechanisms of action, their risks, and their potential for abuse. Stimulants, e.g., caffeine, nicotine, cocaine, amphetamines, MDMA, increase arousal and energy by enhancing activity of neurotransmitters such as dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. While stimulants can elevate mood and alertness, they carry risks of dependence, and in the case of substances like cocaine and MDMA, significant toxicity. Depressants, e.g., alcohol, barbiturates, benzodiazepines, inhalants, decrease activity in the central nervous system, producing sedation, muscle relaxation, and relief from anxiety. They are used therapeutically but have narrow safety margins. Inhalants are particularly dangerous, causing neurological damage with repeated use. Opioids, e.g., morphine, heroin, codeine, opium, act on the brain's opioid receptors, producing analgesia, euphoria, and relaxation. They are highly addictive and have serious risks, including respiratory depression. Hallucinogens, e.g., LSD, mescaline, cannabis, distort perception and can induce hallucinations. They alter sensory input and disrupt ordinary processing, sometimes leading to profound but unpredictable psychological effects. Addiction occurs because the immediate rewards of drug use outweigh abstract long-term costs. Dependence can involve tolerance, withdrawal symptoms, and compulsive use. Similar patterns occur in behavioral addictions such as gambling, overeating, excessive sex, or compulsive work. Hypnosis is a trance-like state involving focused attention, deep relaxation, and heightened suggestibility. It is induced through hypnotic induction and is used for pain control, behavior modification, and treatment of addictions. Although hypnosis cannot override fundamental behavior, it alters the perception of pain, craving, or habit strength. Sensory deprivation reduces external input from one or more senses, leading to altered states of consciousness. Short-term deprivation can produce relaxation and meditation-like effects. Extended deprivation, however, produces anxiety, disorientation, and in extreme cases, hallucinations, making it useful as a tool of coercion or torture. Meditation involves focused attention on an object, sound, breath, or thought, with the goal of reducing external distraction. Practices vary, but meditation reliably produces relaxation, reduced stress, improved concentration, and long-term health benefits, including lower blood pressure and improved immune functioning. Neuroscientific studies demonstrate that meditation alters brain activity and promotes plasticity in regions associated with attention and emotional regulation. Human development is a lifelong process that begins at conception and continues through aging. It involves biological growth, cognitive advancement, and social adaptation, each influencing and interacting with the others. Development begins at conception, when a sperm cell fertilizes an egg, forming a single-celled zygote. The zygote undergoes rapid cell division and within 2 weeks implants into the uterine wall. By the 3rd week, it enters the embryonic stage, during which the foundations of the nervous system, organs, and limbs are formed. This stage is especially vulnerable to teratogens, environmental agents such as alcohol, nicotine, or viruses that can disrupt normal development. After approximately 8 weeks, the organism is called a fetus, continuing to develop until birth. By the 2nd trimester, most major organs are functional, and by the 3rd trimester, the fetus can respond to external stimuli, such as sound or light. At birth, babies are equipped with innate reflexes critical for survival. Examples include the rooting reflex, turning toward a touch on the cheek to find nourishment, the sucking reflex, and the grasp reflex. These automatic behaviors gradually integrate into voluntary actions as the nervous system matures. Cognitive growth in infancy is marked by rapid neural development. According to Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development, children progress through a sequence of stages. First, sensoromotor stage, birth to 2 years. Knowledge is acquired through sensory experiences and motor actions. Object permanence, the understanding that objects continue to exist when out of sight, emerges here. Second, pre-operational stage, 2 to 7 years. Children develop language and symbolic thinking, but remain egocentric, struggling to adopt others' perspectives. Third, concrete operational stage, 7 to 11 years. Logical reasoning emerges, but it is limited to concrete, tangible situations. Concepts like conservation of mass and volume become understood. Fourth, formal operational stage, 12 years and beyond. Abstract reasoning, hypothetical thinking, and systematic problem-solving appear, marking the peak of cognitive flexibility. Learning occurs through assimilation, the incorporation of new experiences into existing mental schemas, and accommodation, the modification of schemas to adapt to new information. Social development in infancy centers on attachment, the strong emotional bond between child and caregiver. Secure attachment fosters confidence and resilience, while insecure attachment can contribute to later difficulties in relationships. The development of a self-concept, or an understanding of one's identity and abilities, begins in early childhood and grows increasingly complex with age. Adolescence is marked by rapid physical changes due to puberty, including hormonal shifts, sexual maturation, and growth spurts. Cognitive development continues, with improvements in executive functioning, reasoning, and moral judgment. Lawrence Kohlberg's model of moral development suggests that adolescents may progress from conventional morality, which emphasizes social rules and approval, to post-conventional morality, which considers universal ethical principles. Cultural differences shape this stage. In many Western societies, adolescence extends into emerging adulthood, ages 18 to mid-20s, a period of exploration before assuming full adult responsibilities. This stage includes experimentation with career paths, relationships, and personal values. Adulthood involves both stability and gradual biological decline. In early and middle adulthood, muscle strength, sensory abilities, and reaction times peak and then slowly diminish. Fertility decreases with age. Women experience menopause, the end of reproductive capacity, typically in their late 40s or early 50s. Men may also experience reduced fertility, though less abruptly. Cognitive and social development continue in adulthood. Work, family, and social relationships become central, and individuals often pursue generativity, contributing to society through parenting, careers, or community engagement. Midlife transitions can involve reevaluation of goals, but contrary to stereotypes, the midlife crisis is not universal. In late adulthood, physical capacities decline further, but many older adults remain active and engaged. They often report equal or greater levels of happiness compared to younger people, with an increasing focus on meaningful social connections. Cognitively, a distinction exists between fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence, the ability to process new information quickly and solve novel problems, declines with age. In contrast, crystallized intelligence, knowledge accumulated from experience, vocabulary, and practical skills, remains stable and often increases. Some individuals develop neurodegenerative conditions such as dementia, a general decline in memory and reasoning. The most common form is Alzheimer's disease, characterized by progressive memory loss, confusion, and cognitive deterioration due to neural degeneration. While these conditions are significant, the majority of older adults retain strong mental capacities and adapt effectively to the challenges of aging. Development is best understood as a lifelong, dynamic process involving continuity and change. Early experiences lay the foundation for later outcomes, but new learning and adaptation occur at every stage. Biological growth, cognitive development, and social relationships intertwine, shaping identity and behavior throughout the human lifespan. Learning is defined as a relatively permanent change in behavior or knowledge that results from experience. It is central to psychology because it explains how organisms adapt to their environments, acquire skills, and modify responses. Several major theoretical frameworks, classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning, describe the mechanisms through which learning occurs. Classical conditioning was first systematically studied by Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov through his experiments on digestion in dogs. In classical conditioning, a neutral stimulus, conditioned stimulus, CS, becomes associated with a stimulus that naturally elicits a reflexive response, unconditioned stimulus, US, producing a learned response, conditioned response, CR. For example, when the sound of a bell, CS, is repeatedly paired with the presentation of food, US, dogs eventually salivate, CR, to the bell alone. Several principles govern classical conditioning. Extinction occurs when the CS is repeatedly presented without the US, gradually weakening the CR. Spontaneous recovery refers to the reappearance of a previously extinguished CR after a pause. Stimulus generalization occurs when stimuli similar to the original CS also elicit the CR. Stimulus discrimination occurs when the organism learns to respond only to the specific CS and not to similar stimuli. Second-order conditioning involves pairing a new neutral stimulus with a previously established CS, producing a chain of associations. Classical conditioning highlights the importance of prediction. Organisms learn to anticipate events in their environment, increasing adaptability, while classical conditioning explains reflexive and voluntary responses. Operant conditioning explains voluntary behaviors. Psychologist Edward Thorndike developed the law of effect, which states that behaviors followed by satisfying consequences are more likely to recur, whereas behaviors followed by discomfort are less likely. B.F. Skinner expanded Thorndike's ideas, developing a systematic analysis of reinforcement and punishment. Operant conditioning centers on the relationship between behavior and its consequences. Positive reinforcement strengthens behavior by presenting a desirable outcome, e.g., giving food for pressing a lever. Negative reinforcement strengthens behavior by removing an unpleasant stimulus, e.g., turning off a loud noise when the lever is pressed. Positive punishment weakens behavior by presenting an unpleasant consequence, e.g., scolding after misbehavior. Negative punishment weakens behavior by removing something pleasant, e.g., taking away privileges. Learning through operant conditioning often requires shaping, the gradual guidance of behavior toward a desired outcome using successive reinforcements. For instance, training a pigeon to peck a target may involve rewarding it first for turning toward the target, then for approaching it, and finally for pecking it. Reinforcement schedules also shape learning patterns. Continuous reinforcement delivers a reward after every correct response, producing rapid acquisition, but also rapid extinction. Partial reinforcement strengthens behavior through intermittent rewards, producing slower acquisition, but greater resistance to extinction. Partial schedules include fixed interval, FI, reinforcement after a set amount of time, e.g., weekly paycheck. Variable interval, VI, reinforcement after unpredictable time intervals, e.g., checking email. Fixed ratio, FR, reinforcement after a fixed number of responses, e.g., being paid per unit produced. Variable ratio, VR, reinforcement after a variable number of responses, e.g., gambling with slot machines. VR schedules are especially resistant to extinction, explaining the persistence of gambling behavior. Not all forms of learning are explained by conditioning. Insight learning involves sudden realization of a problem solution, as famously demonstrated in Wolfgang Köhler's studies, with chimpanzees using tools to reach bananas. Latent learning refers to knowledge acquired without reinforcement that becomes evident when there is motivation to demonstrate it. Edward Tolman's maze experiments with rats showed that animals could form cognitive maps of environments without immediate reward. These findings reveal that learning is not only behavioral, but also cognitive, involving mental representations and expectations. Observational learning occurs when organisms acquire behaviors by watching others. Psychologist Albert Bandura demonstrated this in his Bobo doll experiments, where children who observed aggressive adult models were more likely to display aggressive behaviors themselves. Observational learning requires 4 processes: attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. This form of learning explains the transmission of complex behaviors such as aggression, altruism, language, and cultural practices. It also underlies the influence of media and social environments on individual behavior. Learning theories have broad applications across daily life. Advertising often uses classical conditioning by pairing products with pleasant stimuli, such as attractive imagery or music, to evoke positive emotions. Education employs reinforcement strategies to encourage participation, achievement, and persistence. However, rewards must be carefully designed to avoid undermining intrinsic motivation. For example, overemphasis on external rewards can reduce genuine interest in learning. Behavior modification techniques use conditioning principles to change unwanted behaviors, from reducing smoking to increasing physical activity. Social dilemmas, such as the prisoner's dilemma, illustrate how reinforcement principles and expectations influence cooperative versus competitive behavior. Individuals often attempt to maximize personal outcomes, but collective cooperation yields the greatest long-term benefit. Learning occurs across the lifespan, shaping adaptation at every stage of development. Children rely heavily on observation and imitation, while adults often engage in self-directed and abstract learning. The principles of conditioning, cognition, and observation interact to explain both everyday habits and complex forms of cultural transmission. Memory and cognition are central topics in psychology because they describe the mental processes that allow humans to acquire knowledge, store it, and use it to guide decisions and behavior. Cognitive psychology emerged in the mid-20th century, influenced by advances in computer science. The metaphor of the mind as an information processing system with inputs, storage, and retrieval operations has shaped modern theories of memory and thought. Psychologists distinguish between explicit memory and implicit memory. Explicit memory involves conscious recall of information and can be assessed directly. It is divided into 2 subtypes: semantic memory, the memory of facts and general knowledge, e.g., Paris is the capital of France. Episodic memory, the memory of personal experiences tied to specific times and places, e.g., remembering a birthday party. Explicit memory is often tested through recall, producing information without cues, recognition, identifying previously learned material, and relearning, also known as the savings method, which measures how much faster material is learned the second time. Implicit memory reflects the influence of past experiences on behavior without conscious awareness. Its main components include procedural memory, the memory of motor skills and habits, e.g., riding a bicycle. Classical conditioning effects, in which learned associations shape responses automatically. Priming, the activation of stored knowledge that influences perception or behavior. For example, exposure to the word yellow increases the likelihood of recognizing the word banana. Implicit memories are typically automatic, requiring little to no conscious effort. Memory is also understood in terms of stages, reflecting how information is processed over time. Sensory memory serves as an initial buffer for incoming sensory input. Iconic memory briefly retains visual information for less than a second, while echoic memory retains auditory information for several seconds. Unless attended to, Information in sensory memory rapidly fades. Short-term memory, STM, is a limited capacity system that holds information temporarily, typically around 7 plus or minus 2 items for about 20 to 30 seconds. STM allows active manipulation of information, giving rise to the concept of working memory. Working memory is more dynamic than STM, consisting of a set of mental operations used to manipulate information. The central executive directs attention and strategies such as maintenance rehearsal, repeating information, visualization, and chunking, grouping items into meaningful units. For example, remembering a phone number is easier when it is grouped into segments. Long-term memory, LTM, refers to relatively permanent storage, capable of holding vast amounts of information for extended periods, from days to a lifetime. To move information into LTM, encoding strategies are essential. Elaborative encoding involves connecting new information to existing knowledge. Relating material to the self improves retention, known as the self-reference effect. Other strategies include taking advantage of the spacing effect, distributing practice over time, overlearning, studying beyond mastery, and recognizing that retrieval is influenced by context-dependent memory, recalling information better when in the same environment, and state-dependent memory, recall improved when in the same emotional or physiological state as during learning. Long-term memories are not stored in isolation. They are organized into categories and schemas, mental frameworks that represent knowledge and expectations about the world. Schemas help in encoding by linking new information with existing structures and assist in retrieval by providing cues. However, they also increase the risk of distortion, as people sometimes misremember details to fit their schemas. The biological basis of memory involves neural changes. Long-term potentiation, LTP, refers to the gradual strengthening of synaptic connections through repeated activation, creating durable memory traces. Different brain regions contribute to distinct forms of memory. The hippocampus is essential for explicit memory, particularly the consolidation of new episodic and semantic memories. The cerebellum plays a central role in implicit memory, especially motor learning. The amygdala attaches emotional significance to memories, enhancing recall of emotionally charged events. Case studies of amnesia highlight these distinctions. For example, the patient HM, who had his hippocampus removed to treat epilepsy, lost the ability to form new explicit memories, but retained procedural learning abilities. Cognition is adaptive but prone to systematic errors, known as cognitive biases. These errors arise from the over-reliance on schemas, the influence of salient but misleading information, and the use of mental shortcuts called heuristics. Common biases include source monitoring errors, in which people misattribute the origin of a memory. Confirmation bias, the tendency to seek information that confirms pre-existing beliefs. Functional fixedness, difficulty in seeing alternative uses for objects beyond their typical function. Misinformation effect, in which memory is distorted by misleading post-event information, as demonstrated in research on eyewitness testimony. Overconfidence bias, overestimating the accuracy of one's judgments or memories. Counterfactual thinking, imagining alternative outcomes to events, which can lead to regret or relief. Understanding cognitive biases is important because they affect decision-making in daily life, from personal relationships to legal judgments and financial choices. Awareness of these tendencies allows individuals to critically evaluate their thought processes and reduce errors. Memory and cognition work in tandem. Memory provides the stored representations, while cognition involves the active processing of those representations to reason, plan, and solve problems. The interplay between accurate storage, efficient retrieval, and flexible cognitive strategies underlies the complexity of human thought. Although memory systems are powerful, they are reconstructive rather than perfect, making human cognition both adaptable and vulnerable to error. Intelligence is the ability to think, to learn from experience, to solve problems, and to adapt effectively to new situations. It is among the strongest predictors of success across education, occupation, economics, and social relationships. Psychologists study intelligence both as a general ability and as a collection of specialized skills, with ongoing debates about its structure, causes, and measurement. The modern study of intelligence began in the early 1900s, when French psychologist Alfred Binet, along with Henri Simon, developed the first standardized intelligence test to identify children in need of educational assistance. Building on this, Charles Spearman introduced the concept of the General Intelligence Factor, G, which represents the common cognitive ability underlying performance across diverse tasks. Spearman argued that while individuals differ in specific skills, overall performance tends to reflect a single general capacity for reasoning and problem-solving. At the same time, psychologists also recognize specific intelligences, S, referring to skills in narrow domains, such as mathematical reasoning, spatial visualization, or verbal fluency. Later models attempted to broaden the concept further. Robert Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence divides intelligence into three components: analytical intelligence, problem-solving and reasoning; creative intelligence, innovation and adaptability; and practical intelligence, everyday problem-solving and street smarts. Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences proposes at least 8 distinct forms, including linguistic, logical mathematical, spatial, musical, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalistic intelligence. Modern intelligence tests aim to be both reliable, producing consistent results, and valid, accurately measuring what they intend to. They are also standardized to allow comparison across individuals. The most widely used test for adults is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, WAIS, while children may take the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, WISC. Other standardized assessments, such as the SAT, ACT, and GRE, are designed to measure aptitude and predict academic success. Scores from intelligence tests are expressed as an intelligence quotient, IQ, originally defined as mental age divided by chronological age, multiplied by 100. Today, IQ scores are based on statistical norms, with an average of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. Approximately 68% of individuals score within one standard deviation of the mean, 85 to 115. Research indicates that intelligence reflects a combination of genetic and environmental factors. Twin and adoption studies suggest that heritability of IQ ranges between 40 and 80%, indicating strong genetic contributions. At the same time, environment plays a critical role. Socioeconomic deprivation, malnutrition, limited educational opportunities, and chronic stress can significantly lower measured intelligence. Conversely, enriched environments, access to education, and cognitive stimulation improve outcomes. Biological correlates of intelligence include overall brain size, neural efficiency, and speed of information processing. While intelligence is not localized to a single brain region, activity in the prefrontal cortex and parietal lobes is strongly associated with reasoning, working memory, and problem solving. Intelligence test scores vary across populations. Roughly 3% of Americans score above 130, qualifying as gifted, while a similar percentage score below 70, meeting criteria for intellectual disability. Males are more frequently found at both extremes than females, though average intelligence is equivalent across sexes. Differences also appear across racial and ethnic groups. These disparities are influenced by complex interactions among socioeconomic status, education, culture, and historical inequality. Attempts to misuse intelligence data have led to harmful practices such as eugenics, underscoring the ethical responsibility of interpreting such findings cautiously. Beyond traditional IQ, psychologists study emotional intelligence, EI, the ability to perceive, regulate, and manage emotions in oneself and others. EI contributes to success in relationships, leadership, and work settings. However, EI is difficult to measure reliably, and some researchers argue it overlaps with existing constructs of general intelligence or personality traits. Language is closely tied to intelligence because it enables communication, thought organization, and cultural transmission. Language is structured across several levels. Phonemes, the smallest units of sound. Morphemes, the smallest units of meaning, such as prefixes or root words. Syntax, the rules governing how words are combined into sentences. Contextual cues, including tone, body language, and situation, which influence interpretation. Children acquire language rapidly, beginning with babbling, followed by first words and simple sentences, and then experiencing a vocabulary explosion. Errors such as overextensions, using dog to refer to all animals, reflect active learning of categories. Language acquisition is most effective during the critical period between ages 3 and 7, when neuroplasticity is highest. Beyond this window, language learning is possible but more effortful. Key brain areas underlie language. Broca's area, in the frontal lobe, supports speech production, while Wernicke's area, in the temporal lobe, supports comprehension. Damage to either region produces language disorders, such as expressive or receptive aphasia. Theories of language development vary. Behaviorist theories emphasize learning principles, such as reinforcement and imitation. In contrast, Noam Chomsky argued for an innate language acquisition device, a biological mechanism enabling humans to acquire grammar universally. He distinguished between surface structure, the specific wording of a sentence, and deep structure, the underlying meaning. Bilingualism is increasingly common worldwide. Research indicates that bilingual individuals often show enhanced cognitive flexibility, improved executive control, and greater resistance to age-related cognitive decline compared to monolinguals. Although many non-human animals communicate, their systems lack the generativity and complexity of human language. Studies have taught chimpanzees, gorillas, and dolphins symbolic systems, or sign language, but none demonstrate the full grammar and open-ended productivity that defines true language. Intelligence encompasses reasoning, problem-solving, adaptability, and communication. It is influenced by both biology and environment, expressed through multiple forms, and applied across diverse domains of life. While intelligence tests remain the most accurate psychological assessments available, they capture only part of human cognitive capacity. Broader constructs, including creativity, emotional regulation, and language, highlight the multifaceted nature of intelligence. Affect refers to the range of emotional experiences, from fleeting moods to intense feelings, that guide thought and action. Affect influences judgment, directs behavior, and has profound effects on mental and physical health. These emotional states are closely tied to arousal, the bodily responses generated by the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. Elevated heart rate, increased respiration, and heightened alertness prepare the body to act in response to threats or opportunities. Emotions are mental and physiological feeling, states that capture attention and guide decisions. Psychologists distinguish between basic emotions, anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, and surprise, which are universal across cultures and have distinctive facial expressions, and secondary emotions, which result from cognitive appraisal of situations and involve blends of primary emotions, such as guilt, pride, or jealousy. The brain processes emotions along two pathways: a fast pathway, which sends signals directly from the thalamus to the amygdala, producing immediate reflexive responses to potential threats; a slow pathway, which routes signals from the thalamus through the cerebral cortex before reaching the amygdala, allowing more deliberate evaluation. This dual system enables humans to respond quickly to danger while still allowing reflective consideration of context. Three primary theories describe the relationship between arousal and emotional experience. 1. Canonbard theory. Emotions and physiological arousal occur simultaneously. One does not cause the other. For example, fear and increased heart rate are experienced at the same time. 2. James Lange theory. Emotions are experienced as the perception of bodily changes. In this view, we feel afraid because we tremble, or happy because we smile. 3. Two-factor theory. Emotions depend on both arousal and cognitive interpretation. The intensity of arousal determines the strength of the emotion, while cognitive labeling determines its quality: fear, excitement, anger. When people mislabel the source of arousal, such as attributing racing heartbeats from exercise to romantic attraction, this is called misattribution of arousal. Emotions are communicated and recognized not only through words, but also through nonverbal communication, especially facial expressions, tone of voice, and body language. The facial feedback hypothesis suggests that facial expressions can influence emotional experience. For example, holding a smile may increase feelings of happiness. Stress refers to physiological and psychological responses when demands exceed adaptive capacity. When extreme or prolonged, stress contributes to significant health risks. The General Adaptation Syndrome, GAS, describes 3 stages of the body's response to long-term stress. 1. Alarm, initial activation of the fight or flight response. 2. Resistance, ongoing mobilization of resources to cope with stressors. 3. Exhaustion, depletion of resources, increasing vulnerability to illness. Chronic stress activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis, releasing cortisol, which over time weakens the immune system, raises blood pressure, and contributes to cardiovascular disease. Prolonged stress is also associated with obesity, memory impairment, and increased risk of depression and anxiety. Stress responses differ between sexes. Men are more likely to display the fight or flight response, whereas women often rely on tend and befriend responses, emphasizing social affiliation and nurturing behaviors as coping strategies. Suppressing or ignoring stressors is ineffective and often increases distress. More adaptive strategies include emotional expression, such as talking with others or journaling, reframing, interpreting stressors as challenges rather than threats, positive coping traits, such as optimism, self-efficacy, belief in one's ability to handle challenges, and hardiness, resilience in the face of stress. Emotion regulation, the ability to manage and modify emotional responses, is essential for psychological well-being and long-term health. Happiness is influenced by both genetic predispositions and environmental conditions. Twin studies indicate a heritable component, but social support, meaningful relationships, and purposeful activity are strong predictors of well-being. Research on effective forecasting shows that people often misjudge what will make them happy. Increases in wealth beyond a comfortable standard of living do not generally improve life satisfaction. Major life events affect happiness less, and for shorter durations, than people anticipate, as individuals often return to a baseline level of well-being. Motivation is the force that initiates, sustains, and directs behavior toward goals. Psychologists often distinguish between drives, biological impulses that maintain homeostasis, such as hunger and thirst, and goals, which represent more complex, socially influenced aspirations. Hunger is regulated by hormonal signals, e.g., ghrelin, leptin, insulin, and influenced by cultural norms about body weight and eating practices. In modern societies, the desire for thinness can contribute to eating disorders such as anorexia nervosa, self-starvation, and bulimia nervosa, cycles of binging and purging. Conversely, uncontrolled obesity leads to serious health risks, including cardiovascular disease, diabetes, arthritis, sleep apnea, Alzheimer's disease, and various cancers. Effective weight management depends on balancing energy intake with expenditure, eating less and exercising more. Sexual motivation is fundamental to human behavior, involving courtship, intimacy, reproduction, and parenting. The sexual response cycle, described by Masters and Johnson, includes excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution. Testosterone is central to sex drive in both men and women, though other hormones also contribute. Sexual behavior varies widely, both within and between genders, reflecting cultural norms, biological differences, and personal preferences. Most humans are heterosexual, but smaller populations are homosexual or bisexual. Research shows that the romantic and sexual lives of homosexual and bisexual individuals are largely similar to those of heterosexuals, except where constrained by cultural stigma or restrictive laws. Emotions are fundamental to survival, adaptation, and well-being. They guide decisions, prepare the body for action, foster communication, and shape social bonds. While powerful, emotions must be regulated to prevent harm from chronic stress or maladaptive behaviors. By cultivating resilience, social connections, and positive outlooks, individuals can harness emotion to support both mental health and physical longevity. Personality refers to an individual's consistent patterns of feeling, thinking, and behaving. It captures both stability, how people respond similarly across time, and variability, how people differ from one another in characteristic ways. Understanding personality is central to psychology, because it links biological predispositions, environmental influences, and psychological processes into enduring behavioral patterns. Historically, attempts to explain personality often relied on speculative or pseudoscientific approaches. Phrenology, the belief that skull shape could reveal mental faculties and personality traits, and somatology, the idea that body type predicted personality, have both been discredited. However, there is limited evidence for physiognomy, the view that facial features can reflect personality tendencies, though findings are weak and controversial. Modern psychology conceptualizes personality in terms of traits, enduring dispositions that influence behavior across situations. Traits are typically measured through self-report questionnaires, where individuals assess their own tendencies. The usefulness of such measures depends on reliability, consistency over time, and construct validity, accuracy in measuring what they claim to measure. Popular assessments such as the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, lack strong reliability and validity, limiting their scientific value. By contrast, more rigorous tools, such as the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, MMPI, are widely used in clinical contexts to identify personality structure and detect psychological disorders. Another form of assessment is projective testing, which presents ambiguous stimuli and asks individuals to interpret them. Examples include the Rorschach ink blot test and the thematic apperception test, TAT. While these methods aim to bypass conscious defenses, empirical support for their reliability and validity is mixed, making them controversial in contemporary practice. The trait approach was pioneered by psychologists such as Gordon Allport, Raymond Cattell, and Hans Eysenck, who sought to categorize fundamental dimensions of personality. This research culminated in the five-factor model, Big Five, which identifies 5 broad, cross-culturally consistent dimensions. 1. Openness to experience, imagination, curiosity, and creativity. 2. Conscientiousness, organization, responsibility, and goal-directedness. 3. Extroversion, sociability, assertiveness, and positive emotion. 4. Agreeableness, trust, empathy, and cooperativeness. 5. Neuroticism, emotional instability, anxiety, and moodiness. The Big Five model is supported by extensive research, accurately predicting behavior, life outcomes, and even aspects of psychological disorder. However, a limitation of trait theories is that correlations between measured traits and specific behaviors are often modest. Traits predict behavior best when averaged across many situations, rather than in isolated contexts. Schemas also influence personality judgments. People often perceive traits as more stable than they truly are, partly due to the Barnum effect, the tendency to accept vague or general descriptions, such as horoscopes, as uniquely accurate for themselves. The psychodynamic approach, initiated by Sigmund Freud, emphasizes unconscious processes in shaping personality. Freud proposed a structural model of the psyche. The id, operating on the pleasure principle, seeks immediate gratification. The ego, governed by the reality principle, mediates between the ID and external reality. The superego, representing internalized moral standards, enforces ethical behavior. Conflicts among these components produce anxiety, leading individuals to employ defense mechanisms such as repression, denial, or projection to protect themselves from distress. Freud also proposed a psychosexual stage theory of development, suggesting that personality is shaped by how children resolve conflicts at stages focused on different bodily regions: oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages. While influential, Freud's theories have largely failed empirical validation. Freud's work inspired neo-Freudians, including Alfred Adler, who emphasized striving for superiority, Carl Jung, who proposed collective unconscious and archetypes, Karen Horney, who focused on basic anxiety and social relationships, and Erich Fromm, who explored personality and freedom. These thinkers shifted emphasis from sexual drives to social and cultural influences. Humanistic theories emphasize conscious experience, free will, and the drive toward self-actualization. Carl Rogers highlighted the importance of the self-concept and unconditional positive regard, arguing that healthy personality development depends on being valued without conditions. Abraham Maslow described a hierarchy of needs culminating in self-actualization, the realization of one's fullest potential. These ideas influenced the modern positive psychology movement, which focuses on well-being, strengths, and resilience. Humanistic theories have also shaped therapeutic approaches that emphasize empathy, growth, and client-centered care. Behaviorist and social cognitive perspectives highlight the role of learning and environment. B.F. Skinner argued that personality is shaped through reinforcement histories. Later, Albert Bandura emphasized reciprocal determinism. Personality emerges from interactions among behavior, cognition, and environment. His concept of self-efficacy, belief in one's ability to succeed, remains central in explaining motivation and resilience. Personality has significant biological underpinnings. Twin and adoption studies show that many traits are heritable, with genetic influences accounting for 40 to 60% of variability. Yet personality is not determined by single genes. Rather, it reflects the interaction of many genetic factors. Behavioral genetics research separates influences into genetics, heritability, shared environment, common family factors, and non-shared environment, unique individual experiences. Findings consistently show that non-shared environments, such as peer influences, accidents, and personal experiences, account for much of personality variation. Molecular genetics has begun to identify specific genes linked to traits, although results are complex and often involve small effects across many genetic variants. Biological correlates of personality have also been observed in brain imaging, with, for example, extroversion linked to activity in reward processing circuits, and neuroticism linked to greater sensitivity of the amygdala. Personality arises from the interplay of biological predispositions, unconscious drives, learned behaviors, cognitive appraisals, and social environments. Theories range from Freud's focus on unconscious conflict to humanistic emphasis on self-actualization and trait models that provide reliable measurement. Although no single theory explains personality fully, together they highlight the complexity of human individuality and provide frameworks for understanding behavior, predicting outcomes, and guiding therapeutic practice. Psychological disorders are patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior that are unusual, distressing, and dysfunctional. They interfere with everyday functioning and cause significant impairment in social, occupational, and personal domains. More psychologists are engaged in the diagnosis and treatment of psychological disorders than in any other area of psychology. Epidemiological studies estimate that 1 in 4 Americans, over 78 million people, experience some form of psychological disorder in a given year. Rates are higher among individuals facing poverty, low socioeconomic status, or systemic disadvantage, indicating that mental health is shaped not only by biology, but also by social conditions. Disorders are frequently comorbid, meaning that individuals often suffer from more than one condition simultaneously, such as depression alongside anxiety or substance abuse. Equally important is the stigma surrounding mental illness. Stigma operates during illness, recovery, and even after remission, leading to discrimination and self-blame. Recognizing that mental disorders are not moral failings but complex conditions is critical in reducing stigma and promoting treatment. Psychologists rely on the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, as the authoritative classification system. The DSM organizes disorders into categories based on prototypes, characteristic symptom clusters that define each diagnosis. It has historically used a multi-axial system to capture multiple dimensions of functioning, though later editions have simplified the structure. Critiques of the DSM include concerns about overdiagnosis. Conditions such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, and related developmental disorders are now identified far more frequently than in previous decades, raising debates about whether this reflects improved recognition or excessive pathologizing of normal variation. Anxiety disorders involve irrational and excessive fear responses to everyday situations. They are among the most common disorders, affecting over 57 million Americans annually. Types include generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, persistent and uncontrollable worry about multiple domains of life, panic disorder, sudden attacks of intense fear accompanied by physiological symptoms like heart palpitations, phobias, strong and irrational fears of specific objects or situations, obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, intrusive thoughts, obsessions, and repetitive behaviors, compulsions, performed to reduce anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, recurring distress following exposure to traumatic events. Dissociative disorders involve disruptions in memory, awareness, or identity. Dissociative amnesia results in gaps in memory often related to trauma. Dissociative fugue involves sudden travel or wandering combined with identity confusion. Dissociative identity disorder, DID, formerly called multiple personality disorder, in which two or more distinct identities alternate control of behavior. Mood disorders disrupt emotional regulation and influence perception, thought, and social functioning. They affect approximately 30 million Americans annually. Dysthymia, chronic but milder depressive symptoms. Major depressive disorder, prolonged and severe episodes of low mood, hopelessness, and loss of interest. Bipolar disorder, alternating periods of depression and mania marked by elevated mood, impulsivity, and increased energy. Schizophrenia is a severe psychological disorder involving distortions of thought, perception, and emotion. Symptoms include delusions, false beliefs, hallucinations, false sensory experiences, disorganized speech, flat or inappropriate affect, social withdrawal, and decline in adaptive functioning. Approximately 3 million Americans live with schizophrenia. The condition often requires long-term treatment and profoundly impacts social and occupational life. Personality disorders are long-standing, inflexible patterns of thinking and behaving that cause difficulties in personal, social, and work settings. They are grouped into 3 clusters: Odd or eccentric, e.g., paranoid or schizoid personality disorders. Dramatic or erratic, e.g., borderline personality disorder, BPD, characterized by instability in relationships and self-image, and antisocial personality disorder, APD, marked by disregard for others' rights. Anxious or inhibited, e.g., avoidant or dependent personality disorders. Somatoform disorders involve physical symptoms without identifiable medical causes. Conversion disorder, neurological-like symptoms, e.g., paralysis, without medical explanation. Body dysmorphic disorder, BDD, preoccupation with perceived flaws in appearance. Hypochondriasis, persistent fear of serious illness despite reassurance. In factitious disorder, patients deliberately feign symptoms for psychological gain, often seeking attention from medical professionals. Sexual disorders encompass difficulties in sexual desire, arousal, or performance, as well as distressing or dysfunctional patterns. Sexual dysfunctions, problems with desire, arousal, orgasm, or pain during intercourse. Gender identity disorder, now termed gender dysphoria. Distress stemming from incongruence between experienced gender and biological sex. Debate exists regarding classification, as many individuals experience gender variation without distress. Paraphilias, atypical patterns of arousal involving inappropriate objects or contexts, which become pathological when they cause distress or harm. Treatment for psychological disorders begins with a formal psychological assessment, in which clinicians gather systematic information about a patient's symptoms, history, and functioning. This often includes standardized tests, structured interviews, and observations. Because many disorders have biological components or medical correlates, patients are also evaluated by physicians to rule out or identify Axis 3 physical problems, ensuring that psychological symptoms are not solely due to medical conditions such as thyroid disease, neurological damage, or substance effects. Psychotherapy refers to structured interactions between a therapist and client, designed to alleviate distress, modify maladaptive behaviors, and promote well-being. The central principle is that the patient directly engages with the disorder, working collaboratively with the therapist to address its underlying causes and manifestations. Psychodynamic therapy, rooted in Freud's psychoanalysis and extended by neo-Freudians, emphasizes unconscious motivations and unresolved conflicts. Through free association, patients verbalize thoughts without censorship, allowing hidden material to emerge. Dream analysis is used to uncover symbolic expressions of unconscious desires. The therapeutic goal is insight, awareness of unconscious influences driving behavior. By bringing hidden conflicts into conscious awareness, psychodynamic therapy aims to reduce maladaptive symptoms and improve functioning. Humanistic therapies, inspired by Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, focus on growth, self-concept, and personal responsibility. The therapeutic relationship is central, built on genuineness, empathy, and unconditional positive regard. The therapist engages in active listening and reflection, creating a safe environment for clients to explore feelings and move towards self-actualization. Humanistic therapy emphasizes the patient's subjective experience and potential for change, making it foundational to modern client-centered approaches and the positive psychology movement. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, integrates cognitive and behavioral principles into a structured, goal-oriented approach. It is widely used for anxiety, depression, phobias, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and many other conditions. Behavioral techniques include operant and classical conditioning methods. Exposure therapy gradually reduces fear by confronting feared stimuli, either through systematic desensitization, flooding, or virtual reality exposure. Aversion therapy pairs unwanted behaviors, such as substance use, with unpleasant consequences to reduce their occurrence. Cognitive techniques focus on identifying and restructuring distorted beliefs. Patients learn to recognize automatic negative thoughts, challenge irrational interpretations, and replace them with more adaptive cognitions. CBT is highly evidence-based, demonstrating effectiveness across a wide range of disorders. Many therapists adopt eclectic approaches, combining elements from multiple schools of therapy based on the client's needs. For example, a therapist may use CBT strategies for symptom reduction, while integrating psychodynamic techniques to explore deeper relational patterns. Biomedical therapies aim to influence brain chemistry and neural functioning directly. These include medications and, in some cases, brain stimulation or surgical interventions. Stimulants such as Ritalin, Adderall, and Dexedrine are prescribed in low doses for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, improving concentration and impulse control. Antidepressants, particularly selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, like Prozac, Paxil, and Zoloft, increase serotonin availability and are widely used for depression and anxiety disorders. Mood stabilizers, such as lithium and anticonvulsant drugs, are central in treating bipolar disorder. Anti-anxiety medications, including benzodiazepines such as Ativan, Valium, and Xanax, provide short-term relief but carry risks of tolerance and dependence. Antipsychotic medications such as Thorazine, Haldol, Clozaril, Risperdal, and Zyprexa are prescribed for schizophrenia. Some primarily reduce positive symptoms, delusions, hallucinations, while newer atypical drugs also target negative and cognitive symptoms. Other biomedical approaches include electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, effective for severe treatment-resistant depression, transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, non-invasive stimulation of brain regions to alleviate depression, psychosurgery, rarely used but historically applied for severe cases. Modern neurosurgical techniques are more targeted and ethical than older lobotomy procedures. Treatment is often extended beyond the individual to incorporate social contexts. Group therapy fosters mutual support, modeling, and perspective sharing. Couples therapy and family therapy address relational dynamics contributing to distress. Self-help groups, such as Alcoholics Anonymous, provide ongoing peer support and accountability. Community mental health services aim to prevent, detect, and treat disorders at the population level. These include primary prevention, reducing risk factors before disorders develop; secondary prevention, early detection and intervention; and tertiary prevention, reducing the impact of established disorders through rehabilitation. Although community programs can be effective, research shows their overall impact is typically modest. Psychologists rely on outcome research to evaluate therapies. This involves distinguishing genuine therapeutic effects from three common alternatives: natural improvement, where symptoms decrease over time without intervention; non-specific treatment effects, where improvement comes from patient expectations or the therapeutic setting itself. Placebo effects, where belief in treatment produces real symptom reduction. Findings indicate that both psychotherapy and biomedical treatments are generally effective, with no one type of therapy consistently outperforming others. Instead, success often depends on the therapeutic alliance, the supportive, trusting, and collaborative relationship between therapist and client. Good therapy provides hope, fosters self-reflection, and strengthens relationships, regardless of the specific techniques employed. One limitation of drug therapies is that they often address symptoms rather than causes. When medication is discontinued, symptoms may return in full force, underscoring the importance of integrating pharmacological and psychotherapeutic approaches. Similarly, while prevention programs and community interventions can reduce risk, their effects are typically modest. The complexity of mental disorders, shaped by biological, psychological, and social forces, makes long-term solutions challenging, but also highlights the necessity of multifaceted interventions. Treatment of psychological disorders requires integrating assessment, psychotherapy, biomedical intervention, and social support. No single method is universally effective, but when combined, these approaches provide powerful tools for reducing suffering, restoring functioning, and promoting long-term well-being. Social psychology is the scientific study of how people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are shaped by the actual, imagined, or implied presence of others. A central principle of the field is that human cognition, emotion, and action are profoundly influenced by social interaction, even when individuals are unaware of these influences. Our initial judgments of others rely heavily on observable physical features, including sex, race, age, and attractiveness. These features are highly salient, meaning they capture attention quickly and strongly influence interpretation. Research shows that youthfulness, facial symmetry, and averageness are cross-cultural markers of perceived attractiveness, though cultural contexts add unique standards. People often form snap judgments based on appearance, and in some cases, these inferences can be reasonably accurate. However, they also lead to stereotyping, the tendency to assign traits to individuals based on group membership. Stereotypes can give rise to prejudice, negative attitudes, and discrimination, negative behaviors. Although stereotypes may stem from cognitive shortcuts or even evolutionary predispositions, they can be reduced through positive intergroup contact, education, and deliberate practice in counter-stereotypical thinking. The development of friendships and close relationships is guided by multiple factors, including similarity in beliefs, values, and backgrounds, proximity or physical closeness, which increases opportunities for interaction, self-disclosure, the sharing of personal information, which builds intimacy and trust, responsiveness and interdependence, which promote mutual commitment, passion, which fuels romantic attraction, and intimacy, which sustains long-term bonds. These variables collectively determine patterns of liking, love, and relationship satisfaction. Attribution theory addresses how people explain the causes of behavior. Causes may be assigned to dispositional factors, the person's traits or intentions, situational factors, external circumstances, or both. While people can be accurate, biases are common. The fundamental attribution error refers to overestimating dispositional causes, while underestimating situational ones. Self-serving attributions occur when successes are attributed to personal factors, but failures are blamed on external circumstances. Attitudes are relatively enduring evaluations of people, objects, or ideas. They are important predictors of behavior, though the strength of this relationship varies by situation and by individual differences. Attitudes can change through persuasive communication, shaped by factors such as the credibility of the communicator, the emotional appeal of the message, and the characteristics of the audience. Behavior also influences attitudes. Self-perception theory holds that people infer their attitudes by observing their own behavior. Cognitive dissonance theory posits that inconsistency between behavior and beliefs creates discomfort, which motivates people to change one or the other. Helping others, or altruism, is both an evolutionary adaptation and a learned social behavior. Reciprocal altruism encourages helping with the expectation of future return, while reinforcement and modeling establish social norms, such as the norm of reciprocity, helping those who help us, and the social responsibility norm, helping those in need. The bystander effect, studied by Latané and Darley, demonstrates that the presence of others reduces the likelihood of intervention in emergencies. Their model outlines 3 stages in helping: noticing an event, interpreting it as an emergency, and deciding to act. Each step can be inhibited when others are present, leading to diffusion of responsibility. Aggression is behavior intended to harm others, either physically or psychologically. Biological influences include activation of the amygdala, regulation by the prefrontal cortex, and the role of testosterone, which increases aggressive tendencies in both sexes. Environmental factors such as frustration, pain, and high temperature also increase aggression. Through observational learning, individuals exposed to violent models, such as in media, tend to display increased aggression themselves. Cultural influences also matter. The culture of honor, found more strongly in the American South and West, promotes aggression in response to insult as a means of protecting status and reputation. Humans are social learners, and much behavior is shaped by the influence of groups. Conformity occurs when individuals adjust beliefs or behaviors to align with group norms. It has 2 main forms: informational conformity, motivated by the desire to be correct when uncertain; normative conformity, motivated by the desire for acceptance and belonging. Classic studies demonstrate conformity's power. Sharif's autokinetic effect experiment showed group influence on ambiguous judgments. Ash's line judgment study revealed conformity even against clear evidence. Milgram's obedience experiments highlighted the extreme influence of authority, with participants delivering what they believed were dangerous shocks under instruction. While majorities exert the strongest influence, consistent and confident minorities can also sway opinion under some conditions. The presence of others can enhance or impair performance. Social facilitation describes improved performance on simple tasks, while social inhibition describes poorer performance on complex tasks. Zayank's drive theory explains this in terms of arousal. The presence of others increases physiological arousal, which enhances dominant responses, but impairs novel or difficult ones. Groups provide opportunities for cooperation, problem-solving, and social support, but they also introduce inefficiencies. Outcomes may reflect process gains when group performance exceeds the sum of individual efforts, process losses when coordination problems or motivational deficits reduce effectiveness. Two common process losses include social loafing, where individuals exert less effort in groups when contributions are not identifiable. Groupthink, where the drive for consensus overrides realistic appraisal of alternatives, often leading to poor decisions. Reducing process losses requires clear goals, accountability, and motivation strategies that highlight individual contributions while encouraging cooperation. Social psychology demonstrates that human behavior cannot be fully understood in isolation. Perceptions of attractiveness, judgments of others, attitudes, conformity, aggression, helping, and group processes all emerge from the dynamic interplay between the individual and the social environment. By studying these processes, psychologists reveal both the vulnerabilities and strengths of human social behavior, offering insights into prejudice reduction, relationship building, conflict resolution, and collective decision-making.